This is Van Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Steve Young. And you are a writer and an actor and a songwriter. So you've got a lot of hats, but I want to welcome you to the Van Electric Ghost podcast. You are also an Emmy award-winning um, Writers Guild nomination, so you've got a lot of things that we can get to talk about. But thank you for being on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me, Phantom. Yes, wearing a lot of hats, and the human head can only accommodate one at a time, but I've found a way to put on half of a comedy hat and half of a music hat at the same time.
So I always ask people, you have a lot of hats, but I have a central question to ask everybody. It's like, what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Good question. Some days I'm pondering that very same question for myself. I just have this odd sensibility. Some people have said I see the world in an unusual way that amuses me. And if I express it right, it amuses other people. And for much of my career, that was filtered through the lens of working for David Letterman. I've worked for a few other shows also, but writing material for his show was what I did for a very long time. And as great a fit as that was for me, it turned out I had other impulses which have kind of crept up on me over the last decade or so. I've always loved music. I 20 years ago started taking guitar lessons. I got, okay. I'm not going to say I'm a guitar god, but I can work on my own stuff now. I can record stuff and sometimes get a song together that other people like. So it's related fields, comedy and music, I feel. So it's kind of under the big tent of a certain realm of creative impulse, but they're two different tracks. And sometimes they are on the same track, I will say, like the comedy influences the music. I don't know if music influences comedy, but that's a very deep philosophical question.
What made you go into comedy as a subject matter as a writer? Were you always a comic writer, or did you find that you had a comic sensibility? When you first started writing, was that the initial um, genre you were in, or did you actually find that that was your wheelhouse?
I was a smart aleck by the time I was like in second grade and started to enjoy making the remark in class that made everybody crack up. So I sort of enjoyed that side of things. But when I decided, I was still like, I don't know, in eighth grade or something. Oh, I want to be a writer. I didn't realize you could be a comedy writer or a funny writer. I thought, well, who do I like? Oh, I like Stephen King. I want to be like Stephen King. I'm going to write this. Or some sort of dark, dramatic, whatever. It was only much later, I guess in college, and I was on a humor magazine, and I realized, oh, people graduate from college, and some of them do end up working at places like the Letterman Show or Saturday Night Live. Oh my gosh, this is a revelation. What I'm doing naturally anyway, could that be my career? And it turns out that's what it was. And I was very lucky along the way, obviously, getting wonderful breaks and meeting good people who said, oh, you know who you ought to talk to, all the ways that nobody is completely on their own in the world of whatever success they have. But yes, first I wanted to be a writer, and then much later I wanted to be a comedy writer.
That's interesting because a lot of people would never even. I've talked to so many authors, and I haven't really talked to a lot of authors that write comedy.
It's
more like world builders, like fiction writers and nonfiction writers, but not people who have a comic sensibility, which is interesting.
We are world builders also, but sometimes our worlds come and go in the space of 20 seconds. A lot of what I did at the Letterman Show was really short bits. I mean, from monologue jokes, fake commercials, things like that. So I got very good at having an idea that would sustain briefly with a few twists and jokes along the way, and then you get out before it's overstayed its welcome. And I've found that songwriting uses a lot of those same muscles where, all right, I've got a premise for a song, I got the inspiration for a song, I'm going to work on it and get a few verses and this turn and that turn, and then it's going to be time to be done and get out when you're still feeling like it's fun and you're not just marching endlessly toward a receding horizon. So I like songs in the same way I like comedy. You have a good idea, you do it, and you're
In and
done.
out. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's like you have a defined balance. Like a novel, that's a lot of work.
Yes,
Like
and
a short story.
I'm working on a novel also, and that's a different kind of satisfaction. And you understand that it's a marathon or a series of marathons, not a sprint. But in the same way that songs and short bits, I've got to enjoy the process and entertain myself. Even a longer scale writing project like a novel, yes, I'm still trying to take pleasure in the doing of it. Otherwise, what are you even doing?
Mhm. But the idea I was gonna bring up the synergy between, a comic skit and an actual short form song. Typically today, they're like less than 3 minutes. Back I'm a child of the '70s. I like the longer form songs,
Hmm.
or even like the fusion jazz efforts, Zappa and Miles and everybody else. But the idea that you can have an idea that you can finish within a short amount of time, whether it's 3 minutes or 7 minutes or 14 minutes, it's not a movie. It's
Right.
not it's not the novel.
And that's what culture seems to be all about these days, is the short bites. So in many ways, I don't feel particularly of the time of modern internet culture, but I do have this one advantage, which either by uh, the way I was hardwired or the way the Letterman show taught me, I'm very trained at short bits, and I'm
Yeah, so it works with
doing.
the stage.
Yeah, I mean, there's the 2-minute songs, and I've put some of those out, and then I have the 30-second humorous short bit comedic musical things that I put on TikTok and
Mm,
Instagram and Facebook Reels. And so that is absorbing some of the sort of stray
modern.
energy that would have been used in the short bits at the Letterman world.
Yeah, that's indicative. That puts you in a really good spot because that TV, you're in that kind of TikTok realm. That 30-second, 45-second, 15-second. That's you know because you're trying to hit that, like you're in and out. You're trying to make
Right.
the point and actually have a groove that hits
Now,
immediately.
Phantom, if I may call you Phantom,
Yeah,
I'm curious about TikTok and your perspective on this, because I got on there only like a year ago, and I don't feel
it's a certain.
super immersed in it, because most people that I know, friends of mine, are not doing TikTok. A few are, but not very many. So I still
It's a
feel
young
like,
person's game.
yeah, I'm at this enormous party and I'm standing against the wall holding my drink, and everyone else is talking to each other, and I feel like, how do I talk to these people? And
But
then
it's a lot of
I relaxed and just said, I'm just going to put my little bits on. We'll see what happens. And, it does grow a little
starts
bit
to
if you
grow.
keep
Yeah.
doing it and you start to find your people. This is a theme of everything in the last few years for me, one way or another: music, film, TV, whatever. Find your people, because they are out there.
Well, it's
And
like the law of attraction. Like you put something, you hit it against a wall, and then eventually your tribe comes to you. Because you might not hit right off the bat, but if you're consistent
mm-hmm,
and you keep thing with social media, it seems like if you consistently post and
mm-hmm.
you find the right time to trigger the algorithm, but the idea is if you're consistent, if you don't get, dissuaded because you didn't immediately get a million views, you
Yeah,
keep
I
build
had
up.
realistic expectations. I was not going to come out of the gate with a million views, but yes, the algorithm that rules all our lives now, and we don't really see inside that black box. But people tell me, yeah, just keep making whatever is really authentically you, but keep doing it. And I figure to myself, okay, if I put up 100 short bits. Let's see how I'm doing after 100. And if
Mhm.
I won't be heartbroken if I'm not the new Taylor Swift. I understand that's not really on the table, but as long as each of the 100 things I do that I sort of am chuckling to myself, oh, I like this. Oh, I'm going to work on this. Oh, this is a good one. That's kind of what I'm after now. And I assume is it the same with you? Like, you enjoy the process and you
Well,
hope
I just
people will
yeah.
love
Well,
it.
I do it because I love it. I mean, I've been playing music since I was like 17,
Mhm.
and I'm a synthesist, and I just got into synthesizers. I'm like a big Moog head, like
Mhm.
Roland. Juno head. It's like I love synthesizers, and people was like, oh, you know, whatever. But yeah, I dig it. I dig what they can do. And so I got really into sound design. I got into the whole like kind of into the weeds of it. But I do it because I love it. And then it happens to eventually I run into situations where like I talk to a filmmaker and they say, oh, maybe you can do some soundtrack work for me. Maybe you can go do some sync licensing. So you can just because you do it, then opportunities happen. And you're not trying to be Taylor Swift, but you're just doing it because you love it. And if you people see that you're passionate, that can be infectious and that can work in your
Yeah,
wheelhouse. So you show you're not trying to be desperate, like I'm just trying to get views. I'm doing it because I love it. That's why I do it.
that's right. I think that's the only way forward because we are drowning in content that's clamoring for our attention. And it's just going to, unless you have $1 billion marketing budget, you're just going to be first, I please myself and my circle of friends. And maybe over time, some friends of mine say, oh, you really love this stuff that my buddy's doing. And then some new circle of friends finds it. But it's going to be slow and unpredictable. I know I'm not running this interview, but I'm going to ask you some questions. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Do you ever find that you put out a song or something and the song that you thought was, oh, people will love this one does so, and then the one that you think is the not
The
as
worst one.
good is like, why did that take off?
I find that with musicians, we find that all the time. I've talked to a lot of musicians and they're like, the song that they like their A&R picked to be the single, they're like, no, that's not the right one.
Uh-huh.
Right. And then it is the right one because the one they think that everybody will love when they play it in concert, nobody likes it. You know, it's like the fans don't dig it. Like you dig it, but they don't. And so they sometimes the fans they know what they like about you, and you know what you want to do. So you put your stuff into your album, and then you know that the deeper songs that you might have a lot of passion about, like maybe not really resonate with your fans. So, but sometimes that's just what it is. The thing today that's a problem is the playlist. We're not album oriented, and so it's harder to get those nuggets because they only want you to do like one. So you got to be good with that. You got to find people to help you pick that right one.
Yeah, there are people who know the dark arts of this stuff, and I don't think I will ever be that smart about it. But I've made my peace with all these mysteries. Like, okay, I won't know what one of my odd bits will really strike a chord with somebody. That's not my job to figure out really what the outer world is going to think. My job is just keep making the stuff.
Yeah,
And
it's
yes,
kind of throwing at the wall.
and you can look at patterns and say, oh, apparently people really like it when I do this and hate it when I do that. Maybe I shouldn't do that anymore. But if you really love doing the things that people hate, well, God bless you. Yeah, you're gonna. Well, I'm sure we both would love to be overwhelmed with likes and shares, but it's not the real reason that I enjoy spending hours in front of the thing, editing a song or recording the vocals or whatever.
So when you find out, I want to ask you about your writing process. So is the writing process for a comedy skit the same process you've been following for your songwriting, or do they end up evolving differently?
It's a little different because at the Letterman show, I had to get to the office every morning when we were doing a show with ideas ready to pitch, whether I was in a good mood or not, whether I was in a funny mood or not. And that's what separates the professionals from the hobbyists. Hobbyists might occasionally come up with a great riff or a great idea for a song or a great comedy bit. But professionals will always keep coming up with the material, and not all of it will be the A-list stuff maybe, but it will be pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And as a professional writer, I couldn't wait for the right feeling to be inspired. I just had to go and start doing something. right now with the songs, nobody cares if I have a new batch of songs ready to put out at a certain date. It's not like the Beatles in 1965 with the record album, the record companies screaming, "Where's the next album? Where's
Where's
the
the
next?"
song? Where's
Yeah,
the song?
you got to feed the machine. Nobody cares if I feed my machine or not. So it's up to me. So I got to operate on that luxurious. When I'm inspired, I'll work on something.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, the Letterman habits did spill over there, just because my mind is always on. The gears are turning. On my computer, I've got, I don't know how many dozens of fragments of songs and half done lyrics, or songs that are really done, I just haven't recorded yet. And I'll go out for a walk and I'll come back and I'll have an idea for another song, and just, I got to jot down those 4 lines. So that's when it's still fun. If someone was looking at the clock or looking at the watch and tapping it, "Where's the stuff? Where's the stuff?" Then it would start to feel, it would start to feel like, the fun's draining out of it. And so I hope I will find new audiences, but I also hope that they won't come to rule my existence with their demands. So these are first world problems, I understand.
Yeah, well, there's always that demand that people want you to repeat your biggest hit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so like any songwriter, they run into it like, "Well, Stairway to Heaven, just do it again." Or like Purple Rain, keep on doing it again. And Prince used to like rebel against that and purposely not play it, and actually go and play whole concerts without playing it, and totally go in a totally different direction, because like it's not fun for me to play that every day. I understand the fans want it, but sometimes it's like I'm not going to do exactly what the fans want. I'll give them something else.
If I ever get to the point where I have a fan base that has very specific desires, "Steve Young, you should be doing more of this thing. Why can't?" That would be a weird problem, because right now it's like, just like my friends are saying, "Oh, this is good. Oh, good for you." Nobody is waiting with growing impatience for me to repeat some previous thing. So it's still, and I think this is true for a lot of people now, in a world where the money is very mysterious and not too many people make serious amounts of money from writing or music or anything. So we have, unfortunately, the luxury of being the masters of our destiny here, and not being swept along in the powerful corporate current of a record label with certain demands on us.
Well, yeah, they wanted you to just clone it like the Monkees, clone the Beatles. But that tends to be like, once you get a formula, they want you to repeat it.
Mm-hmm.
So if whatever's in the top 10 formula, we'll repeat that. And come up with another boy band, come up with another like Beyonce, or come up with another Taylor Swift, so you'll get kind of a clone. But what the cool thing about being independent is that then you can kind of be like, I was really a big fan of college radio and underground independent bands. So like when REM wasn't big, like when they were underground college back in 79, 80, I would listen to those bands that hadn't really broken onto a major label, on really the small labels. And I was just had this kind of Lou Reed, Velvet Underground mindset, that I liked the idea that the Velvets weren't actually known, except for like producers knew who they were, or like a band like Big Star, Alex Chilton, like people didn't know who Big Star was, though Alex Chilton wrote the letter in the box tops, but nobody knew his Big Star stuff, because it's like, but then the critics and the songwriters knew who he was, and I was always kind of driven by the kind of unknown great band, like Diamond in the Rough.
Right. I think there is an impulse on a lot of people, like, okay, yeah, the Beatles, I think we've all heard of them. I don't have to be actively supporting or promoting them, or they won't care if I ever buy a Beatles record. But this other band here, this group that almost no one's ever heard of, my fandom will count for something. And also I'll feel like I'm part of an exclusive club where my taste is esoteric, but well-developed enough that I have proved my credibility by liking this band. So there's some of that in it. I've had versions of that in my life where
You're like,
I like something more obscure than you like.
you're like Sun Ra. But yeah, it's just well, I think also I just have a curiosity for the things that aren't in, they're on in the underground.
Mhm.
That I like to, started this podcast interviewing independent and unknown emerging artists.
Oh, I fit right
And then
in.
I branched to a lot of other people, but that was my wheelhouse. That's what I did start in 2016. It was all just bands and songwriters.
Mhm.
And I still talk to songwriters maybe one or two a month because the podcast world has changed where you talk to a lot of different types of people. But that was my goal, was to talk to people in that space. But what I've tried to do is creativity and have that thread. It's like, oh, a CEO or somebody who has an entrepreneur, they can be creative and they're not a writer, but they still have that kind of spark. So I can still talk to them in those kind of terms.
Yeah, there's plenty of realms for creativity, and even worlds like the business world where somebody has an idea. What if we did this and used technology and and figured out a way to get the information our company needs and reach our customers in a way no one's ever done before? And it's not the same as being a poet or a songwriter, but yeah, I would say that can count as creativity.
So how did you end up in Nashville, and why did you pick Nashville over like Austin or LA? What was the vibe there that you kind of synced up with?
Oh, I blundered into Nashville. I have uh, very little track record of making plans and making them happen. I get swept along on the currents of history. So here's I'll try to make this as compact as possible, but it is a twisting tale. So when I was a Letterman writer, one project I had to be in charge of on the show was an ongoing comedy bit called Dave's Record Collection, which was about real, unintentionally funny record albums. And I would go out to record stores and thrift shops and look for weird records that we could get a joke out of. I started finding
Hmm.
souvenir private pressing records from company conventions and sales meetings, and they were like Broadway shows, but they were all about the triumphs and tragedies of being a Ford tractor dealer or selling BF Goodrich tires or being a J.C. Penney manager. These are industrial musicals and they are similar to Broadway shows, but the people at these shows were only the company insiders, the dealers and salesmen at the convention, and the public could never go see these shows. And they almost became completely extinct and unknown. But I and a few other people started finding the very rare souvenir records. So a friend of mine and I wrote a book called Everything's Coming Up Profits, which is actually the name of a terrible little floor tile company musical from the late 60s. Then there's a documentary made by a filmmaker named Dava Whisenant called Bathtubs Over Broadway about my accidental finding of this secret showbiz world and my collecting, but also meeting the people who wrote these shows and performed in them. The movie is wonderful. It's
Hmm.
on Amazon and Apple and a
Yeah,
few
yeah.
other places.
You talked about it in your write up. Yeah. So it came
Yeah.
Amblin
So
Entertainment. Yeah.
that movie came out in 2018 on the film festival circuit, and one of the film festivals was in Nashville. I told you this would come around to make
So that's
sense.
how you got to
Yes.
Nashville.
So I get to Nashville, and I'd started very early fumblings of writing songs. And at that point, I'm just like singing into my iPhone in my living room. That's my technology. But I met a guy named John Shane in Nashville who was very interested in my record collecting and all that, but he also very plugged into the music scene. He does sort of novelty country music stuff himself. Very funny, very smart guy. And he introduced me to some people he knew in Nashville, and they're saying, "Oh, you write songs? Oh, you play guitar? Oh, you're pretty good." Oh, so suddenly I know people in Nashville. And fast forward to my friend John saying, "Your songs are actually pretty legit. We got to get you a recording session down there." So he helped set up these sessions in Nashville, and none of it would have happened without him. I wouldn't have the first idea how to do
How'd you
any
get
of
in
this.
there?
Yeah. So, but it was magical. Suddenly there are these studio musicians, these geniuses. A woman named Alison Brown produced most of the tracks at Compass Studios, and she's got a Grammy Award. She's a brilliant banjo player, and the room is filled with people who've played on every famous record
A
you've
bunch
ever
of
heard
studio
of. And
guys. That's
yeah,
awesome.
and they're sitting there paying attention to my songs, and I'm a nobody. And
So they
yeah,
interpreted your song and they started getting the feel, and then they kind of
yeah,
knew what to play.
yeah.
That's the great thing where they when you pick it up with guys like the Funk Brothers, they used to just with Motown, they just pick up what Smokey was writing or what Marvin was writing, what any of those guys were writing, and they would knew what to go with it. You know, they knew what was going to work. And
I'm
when you
not
run
at that. Yeah, I'm not able to give many of those guidance notes, but great people who kind of know each other and know what their possibilities are, they latched onto this stuff. And these first 6 songs I put out on this album, Broken Heart Insurance,
Mhm.
they sound so legit to me. It's like frightening. Like, wow, you mean I could have been doing this all my life? Probably I couldn't, though. I think I only had to go through the rest of my life before I could get to this stage when I really wanted to write songs and was in the right place at the right time to make some of this happen.
So what type of country genre would you say your music falls in?
I would say I've come to understand that the term alt country is a
All
gigantic
country.
catch-all term for, well, it's country music, but it's not quite the normal formulaic stuff that's going to get played on the big radio station. So it's the everything else. And
Mhm.
there's some elements of bluegrass to it. There's a little banjo on one song, but it's guys and women who can play the range from like R&B to rock to country to bluegrass. So it's all over the map, but yes, we'll call it alt country. And I also think it's tough to find humorous, comedic music on country radio. It's a bit of an outlier, and not surprisingly, with my background, many, if not most of my songs are going to have some humorous element to them. So yeah,
Wow,
mostly humorous alt country. Let's call it that.
that's interesting. 'Cause I was a big fan of Uncle Tupelo, and you know that kind of was an all country band that kind of well, it formed Wilco and
Okay.
Sunvolt. It came out of that band, and that band was kind of like an all country favorite back in the 80s, 90s. But so that's my understand. Well, that's my feel for that genre. But
Hmm.
I've always loved you know the band. They're Americana, like
Oh yeah.
and they're Canadians, and they're playing like American Southern, trying to echo country music from the U.S. But most of the band are Canadians.
Yeah, I'm sure even by now it's must have spread around the world. There are probably some genius Americana musicians in Japan now,
Oh
or
yeah,
Bulgaria or something. Yes, this stuff goes through the cracks in the culture and mixes with other things, and you get the odd local homegrown hybrids. I have not only got this great sounding stuff from Nashville, but I'm doing more home recording now. I've upped my game. I'm not
oh wow.
just singing into an iPhone anymore. I want to assure any potential listeners
Now
out
you
there
have
that,
your DAW, you know, you have your digital audio
oh
workstation.
yeah, I'm getting okay at twirling the knobs and moving some sliders and all that. I'm still, just a cheerful amateur, but people who've paid attention to my stuff, like my friend John in Nashville, will say, "Wow, you're getting pretty good. You really, yeah, you learned how to use the compression on the vocals now. Oh, you're getting better with the reverb and the this and the
Oh, now
that." And
now you're doing the preamps. You're playing with the
uh,
preamps, and you're playing with your your filters and all this all that stuff. Like I decided I wanted to have the means of production so I wouldn't have to go to the studio. So I started buying soundboards and multi-tracks and all the gear and the plugins. And so I've got everything in my little studio, and I can just go and hit record and just do whatever I want, whenever I want. So yeah, I think once you just start you're getting the bug and it's actually, makes sense to actually have some of that in your own space rather than to have to travel to a space. Did
mhm.
you kind of make that decision like, hey, I come up with ideas enough time enough of the time that it justifies me having this.
I think it'll be a while before I outgrow my pretty simple system here. But right now I can put something together and say, all right, let's just say it's a demo. And if I
Mhm.
show it to some people and someday I'm going to put out more music, I can hire the serious people to
Yeah,
make this at a
tighten it up.
higher
Yeah,
polished level and all that. But I'm happy making
your
my
demos.
my bits at home right now. And the upward trend, who knows? Yeah, maybe I'll be in 5 years loaded down with pedals and soundboards and ringed by 17 monitors and all that. I don't know, but
You don't need all of that.
yeah.
Sometimes you can have a smaller level, but yeah, the demo to me is so intimate, and sometimes like your demo can be pretty close. Like even when people get it, they're like, I'm not gonna try to try to overdo it. Like they would, I like to like the less is more sometimes because you kind of like you go with the Phil Spector wall of sound, or do you go with like a Nebraska? You're like
Hmm.
sometimes it's like the Tascam Nebraska. That was a 4 track like Fostex or Tascam, you know, event, and sometimes that works. For vulnerability and authenticity, you don't have to have like all the bells and whistles sometimes.
Yeah, I do some things where it's just acoustic guitar and vocal. I think it probably would be improved by some master mixer and mastering and whatever, but I'm pretty happy. And maybe that's just naivete, but
No. So that lo-fi is good. I mean, the punk aesthetic kind of had that idea, the lo-fi,
and
and the kind of vulnerabilities.
that's another thing that encouraged me to put my toe in the water at TikTok, because people were telling me it's very much a do-it-yourself ethos. People like to see that it's just real people making stuff in their house and in their world, and honesty about I'm just like you, and I've got an idea and I'm going to make it.
Mhm.
People like that, and I think, okay, well, again, I wouldn't have
That's
thought I
what.
was a candidate for TikTok stardom, and the stardom part may not come, but at least I can be honestly saying, yeah, I'm doing stuff that kind of is just me, a guy, and a guitar, and an idea.
Yeah, that was the whole idea of the punk aesthetic because it was like a rebellion against the professional, like, get bands like, Queen and
Hmm.
Yes, and, all these really, heavy progressive bands, Genesis, I love those bands. Like I'm a keyboard, so Yes and Genesis, yeah. But then I actually did respect the punk aesthetic of like the Clash and, and the Ramones and anybody coming out of CBGBs. I like the idea that you could, yeah, you don't have to have perfect pitch. A guy like Joe Strummer, he's not singing like Led Zeppelin. He's not Robert Plant. He's not gonna do that, right? But that doesn't mean it's not good. Like you can have like Bob Dylan is the big example. You don't have to have that, a voice like Frank Sinatra to be a great singer.
Yeah, but you got to have something. You got to have some compelling
You're
story to tell in your songs, or some unique outlook or poetry or attitude or something that's going to hook people in. And if it's the right recipe, then your rough-hewn, honest, untrained voice becomes an asset instead of an impediment. But I don't know where I land on any of that. Sometimes I think, oh, should I take voice lessons? Maybe. Should I take acting lessons? I keep showing up in films. When am I going to hit the glass ceiling of not being able to do a good job
or
in
like
a
a vocal training coach. Like, cause
yeah,
sometimes,
maybe.
yeah, the question is like, do you feel like comfortable with your voice? Like a lot of times when people first start singing, they either they kind of come to terms with the fact that like, okay, I accept my vocal capabilities. Like I know my limitations, or that maybe you don't. And so
Hmm.
the idea is like, so when you first started getting the idea that you're gonna put your songs down, did you some people like agonize about their voice, or did you just say, "Well, I'm gonna do it and see what happens"?
Well, naivete has always been my friend. I thought, well, I can carry a tune, and I can harmonize. I'll be all right. Allison Brown, the producer in Nashville, said, you know, Steve, the pandemic was actually for you and for these songs a blessing in disguise, because when we started the recordings, doing the first sessions, it was before the pandemic, and then everything slowed way down and we didn't finish them for a long time. But over that long time, you kept redoing the vocals and you got better and better. And your singing is much stronger now. And I can definitely hear that. I don't know if my voice is a gorgeous instrument, but it's getting to be a better version of what it can be. And I kind of like some aspects of my voice now. And I'm not going to say that, look out world, you're going to forget about Frank Sinatra once you hear this guy. That's I don't need that, but I think my voice suits what I do, and that's kind of the key.
It works with your material. That's like Dylan, like his voice works with his songs.
Yeah, so I want to be the Steve Young version of that.
Yeah, because that's the thing, is like once you start to hear yourself, because other people, one thing as a musician, you realize like your voice is an instrument, and once you actually start to learn how to control it, like you can play your guitar, play your bass, or play your piano, you start to realize how you can actually sing the words and how you should approach the mic and how you should. There's all these things you start to learn, and it kind of like, it's like the 3-point shot when you're an athlete. You keep on making it, you're going to get better and better. And it's why musicians, we practice, because the more you practice, the better you get.
I'm sure I'm still early in that process. If I live long enough, fingers crossed, I'll continue to get better at all these things, whether it's running the equipment or playing guitar or singing. But very early on, when I was taking guitar lessons and I started getting okay at finger picking, and I felt like this gate had swung open. Oh my God, look what my fingers can do this. And after a while, I'm not even really thinking about it. I'm just thinking about what music I want. Yeah, and I thought, this is great. I'm never going to be bored again. If I have a guitar, I'll be happy forever. So just the joy of being able to entertain and satisfy yourself with whatever skills you're developing.
Well, you can get in the zone with your instrument. Like when you get in the zone with your voice, or you get in the zone on your bass guitar, you start to realize like, wow, I've got the muscle memory. I'm not apprehensive about it. I'm not overthinking it. Cause like when you have that kind of like in the moment stream of consciousness, I always like love to just put the recorder on and just get at the piano, put the mic by the piano, and just start throwing some ideas, like sketching it out. And I might run that for like an hour, then go back and listen to it after a walk and say, oh, here's the gem at like 30 minutes and 5 seconds. This is the thing I should work on.
I have versions of that too. Like it might be 1:30 in the morning and I'm noodling on the guitar. Oh, that's pretty good. What is that? I'm going to forget that. So I record it into the phone. And then the next day I go, what was that thing I was doing last night? And I would have completely forgotten it, except now I have a little audio note and I say, hey, that's something. I should remember that for later.
That's what I kind of learned from reading about songwriters, because I read about Zappa, read about Neil Young, and they were always putting their tape on, and they were like taping everything, because they kind of learned like sometimes you miss it, and you should kind of put it down, because you never know what gem's going to come out, because like the universe is giving you this stuff. Hendrix was known for just putting things out when he was a session player. There was a story when he was with the Isleys that suddenly he just went off and did something that didn't fit the song they were working on. And they asked him, what the heck are you doing? They said, well, the universe gave me and I just had to put it down. He's like, he just had to put it down. It didn't, he usually get fired that way, but that's what happened.
Yeah, we're lucky now that you don't need the whole room in a building full of giant reel-to-reel tape players or whatever. You can make your first draft right on your phone. Yeah,
voice memo.
Yep.
Do you find yourself like, do you get ideas of just walking in the woods or like in the plane or something? You just want to write down your lyrics in your phone. Do you just get ideas anywhere where you are?
Yeah, a lot of things are inspired by just something odd I notice when I'm out in the world. And sometimes it's turning over some problem or conundrum in my head about, whatever personal thing you're worried about, and and you think of a sort of snappy line about it, and you think, oh, maybe that's the first line of a song. So yeah, I've got a lyric file with just fragments, and I've got the audio notes.
So for promotion, have you gotten into like, well, MTV is gone, but we still create videos for a lot of projects. Have you gotten into creating videos for your album, or do you maybe just do clips for like social media?
I'm very interested in videos, having come out of the Letterman world and the visual medium of television. Right now, the Nashville album, which is called Broken Heart Insurance, I have one video out. It's for the title track, Broken Heart Insurance, and it's again, wonderful, talented friends helped things turn out far better than I would have been able to imagine myself, with people helping me shoot against a green screen and then making a digital background. And yeah, I'm very happy with that. Broken Heart Insurance, it is on YouTube. I've got another video done that I'll be putting out soon. And I make homemade videos for some of my other little weird songs also. So yeah, I really, as much as I feel like part of me grew up just thinking music is just music, but then my Letterman world and everything since is music plus video is going to be the way to.
Well, yeah, it's how you connect with this new audience. Everything has to be visual.
Yeah.
But have you in Nashville, have you played like live gigs?
I've been slowly emerging from my living room. I've done a few things now. I haven't played in Nashville. I'd be, of all places in the world, to get up on stage with a guitar. That's a pretty intimidating one. Maybe I'll get there someday. I've done a couple of shows where I've been a guest or a co-host, and that's involved doing some of my songs live, and that's gone pretty well. But that's an ongoing project. I'm in the early stages of trying to figure out a show to do here in New York with a bunch of my songs and maybe some special guests, friends, and bits of comedy, things like that. We'll see.
Oh, cool. So you could like stream a whole like a event with some of your comedy and your music, and maybe
I have to work with a producer to figure out exactly what form this should take. But since my name is Steve Young, a friend of mine suggested that I call the show "The Night Is Young," and I thought, oh, that's pretty good. Yeah, we should do that.
That's a good hook.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could depend on your audience that knows from your comedic work, but then you could introduce them into your music too. So
yeah, slowly kind of getting people used to the idea that Steve Young used to be this guy in the back room at a TV show. Now he's not in the back room anymore. He's
to the front.
Found things that he wants to get out in front of a microphone and tell the world and sing to the world. And yeah, I was a little surprised. I thought I was a backroom guy, but then I started getting this habit of, I think I like to do other things, and people seem to enjoy them. So I'm going to keep doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting because being a keyboardist in a band, usually we're not front. But then eventually, in order to, in my kind of path, I made that choice to kind of push it up front, which is not, all the other bands I'd ever been in, it wasn't really up front. But then like, if you want to control your own idea, like, well, you got to get on a mic. You got to write the song. Otherwise there's a lead singer, he's getting all the attention, or the guitar player's getting all the attention. So if you got to kind of come out and say, well, this is my idea. This is so like that when you have that vision, because you had to have a vision for this record. When did you have the vision to actually put the album together? Was this something that you were working toward, or had this in the back of your head?
I think when my friend John said, let's get some recording sessions going in Nashville. And after a while, we had the makings of 6 songs, which I guess some people will say, well, that's an EP. That's not a real album.
Well, in the 70s, it could have been an album, though.
And also, when I got going with CD Baby, they say if it's got more than one song on it, then it's an album. So the definition of album is very loose now. But they do seem like, all right, this is a coherent batch, if for no other reason that they all sound wonderful because they were done with these great people. So that's
So it
bat
feels like
number
the
one.
album, yeah,
Yeah.
because we're in the age of the playlist, and being a child of the '70s, the album is like Sergeant Pepper's isn't a concept album per se, but it feels like one. But
Hmm.
what it feels like it's a cohesive piece. It's not like Tommy. Like
Yeah.
Tommy's a concept album,
Yeah.
but Sergeant Pepper's is kind of a precursor to a Tommy. It is kind of this idea that you can have this theme. They're not just a bunch of singles strapped together.
Hmm.
It feels like it's some cohesive whole, and they kind of created the age of the album. I mean, the Beatles are kind of known as the ones that kind of solidify the fact that you can have this whole collective of songs that goes together in a really a synergy. There's a synergy between them. It might not tell a story, but it feels like they belong together.
And now we're back down to everything is broken up into tiny fragments again, it seems like.
Like the '50s. We're like back to the singles.
Yeah. Well, that's okay too, because right now I tend to work on songs that don't necessarily
Go
have
together.
any through line. I think my brand is the guy who refuses to settle on a brand, because I got a lot of other stuff that doesn't sound Nashville-y. And I think every time I come up with something that's unlike anything I did before, I think, oh, people are going to want me to stay in my lane. I don't know what my lane is going to be.
That's why the idea of expansiveness, or if you follow like in Miles Davis, he goes from bebop fusion to kind of Afro uh, jazz. He was all over the map, and but his fans will always like say, "Well, bebop is real jazz.
Hmm.
Everything else is not." Right? So they were the traditionalists would say, "Well, the canon is bebop," and you went outside the canon, and it was like,
Hmm.
"Well, I don't care. I'm going to do it because that's what I want to do."
Again, the notion that I could have fans that would be disappointed in me is, I'll worry about that later.
But I think that the idea that you could go whatever direction you want, like some people feel like, well, I'm going to be a punk rocker. I'm just going to stay in there. But what if you want to do some funk? Like,
Yeah,
are you going to suddenly think that you can't do the funk because you labeled yourself as a punk rocker? But like, what if you want to get into that? What's the problem?
I do sort of am amused. I'm amused by the idea that maybe someday I'll put out a song. Let's say it's funk, for argument's sake, and the world suddenly is on fire. Oh, this Steve Young, this funk legend, Steve. This can't be the same guy who did these Nashville country songs, is it? I do enjoy the notion that people might get confused by me being
Yeah,
wearing too many hats. If we can
too
go
many
back to that,
hats.
yeah.
But well, and some people will tell you this. I get advice all the time. It's like, oh, you should stay in this genre.
Hmm.
That's the only thing you should do. But I've talked to a lot of writers and filmmakers, and it's like, well, sometimes I want to do like a book that's outside my genre, so I might use a pseudonym. I've talked to these authors. It's like, yeah, like I do romance, but then I did a fancy year and I did it under a different name
Uh-huh.
because
Yeah.
they wanted to put it out, but then they kind of told they're like, well, use a different name because like you don't want to mess with that, but they still put it out. So like musicians, Bowie was a chameleon. He was always changing form,
Hmm.
and
Uh,
that's not as common anymore. But that's kind of the wheelhouse. I was like, yeah, why can't you be like Bowie?
and Stephen King, I know we briefly mentioned him earlier, but he put out stuff under a different name for a while, not so much because it was vastly different, but because he was curious if it isn't part of the Stephen King juggernaut, if it's
Where
just
people
something
read
that
it.
under this different name, is it possible that it will die and just sink like a rock? Does it have to be in the Stephen King empire, or will this other pseudonym author actually do okay also? And under the name Richard Bachman, he started
Yeah,
putting out.
yeah,
The guy was writing too many books to put out under his own name, so he was being this other.
other self.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and he was starting to get a decent fan base before it blew up and somebody
because he
figured out it
found
was
out and
him.
figured out it was him. Yeah,
Yeah, imagine having, oh, I've written too many books. My publisher can't absorb them all. I have to put them out under a fake name. What a
yeah,
guy.
yeah. That happens sometimes in music. There's stories of people doing that. Prince was famous for putting things out and giving songs away to other people.
Oh, yeah.
And
And
you know,
the Beatles in the early years, some of their Lennon or McCartney songs ended up being #1 hits for other people,
other
like
bands, yeah.
Peter and Gordon, which is
When
hilarious.
Harrison had so many songs that he had to put out All Things Must Pass, he had
Oh
like
yeah,
three album
yeah, he had a
albums.
backlog.
On like not letting them put the songs on the albums.
Yeah,
But his songs were so good. It's like, well, those albums could have been bigger. Those
and
Beatles albums could have been bigger, but I guess you didn't want to check that, you know.
it's crazy. He wasn't even writing songs until like the Beatles were already well underway. In like 1964, he wrote his first song, and then 5 years later, he's got like "Here Comes the Sun" and something, and just makes you think, wow, do we all have the potential to do that if we're around
Ramp up.
people who encourage us? Or well, I don't know if he was encouraged quite, but just he was in the mix in a way that made him think, hey, I can do this too.
Well, I think when you get around like-minded people that don't put you down,
Mm-hmm.
then the possibility, because if you have somebody around it's like, oh, that's nothing's possible.
Mm-hmm.
But you're around people that were like, what? Why not? If you're, I found like if I'm around other musicians, that's like, why can't I use this key? Why can't I invert this? Why can't I do that? And then you like, wow, everything's open. So then you can try things, and you don't feel like, oh, I'm just gonna play I'm just gonna play pentatonic scale because that's all they want me to do.
Mm-hmm.
But versus somebody's like willing to kind of go everywhere, then you're like, wow, then that gives you a permission structure.
And
Yeah.
also the permission of being around great people and seeing that they do a lot of first drafts that aren't good, or things that sputter out and turn into nothing. You have to be okay with, well, a lot of my starts are going to be false starts, because look at all these geniuses who, for every song or book of theirs we know, there's other ones that didn't get there.
There's 100 on the floor. You know,
Yeah.
like every time you look at I go back and look at Dylan's versions of like Idiot Wind, or versions of Tangled Up in Blue, and like different lyrics,
Mhm.
different structures, different I was listening to the Basement tapes, like the 10-hour version of the Basement tapes. And all the false starts with the band in the
Mhm.
basement. And it's him telling Robbie, no, it's in this key, it's that key, and oh, maybe it's not. And then I just found that very instructive, because I just listened to the whole 10 hours of what they were doing in the basement. And that to me is like, that's exactly what I think writing music is like. Being in a basement with a band just trying things out, and Dylan's on a typewriter just banging it out. Robbie just comes up with something like, why not? Just do it.
Yeah, somebody once had the saying that don't worry about your first draft of your screenplay or your novel or your song or whatever, because the first draft, you're just shoveling sand into the sandbox. Your later drafts are when you make the real sand castle, but you're not expecting to throw a shovel full of sand and it turns into a sand castle immediately.
Oh, yeah. There's a build-up. You listen, like I was listening to Hendrix, like all these attempts at solos for stuff on Electric Lady, because I'm a big
Mhm.
Hendrix freak. And then you get to the one that he put on the record, and it's like there's so many variations of what he could have done, and then like the one he found
Mhm.
was this gem, but he had a lot of gems. But the one he found that he actually put out just feels like, wow, I can see why that's the one. Because it is gelled, but it's like a process. You can see like all the rough drafts of what he was trying to get to, and that to me is just shows you like the workman work. The people sometimes think it's magic.
Mhm.
There's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a volume business. And at the Letterman show, the writers were very used to writing a lot of stuff and almost none of it would get used. So that was an education for me. And I understand that kind of ratio is just going to be the way it goes for most anything you try.
Now, in terms of like when you were writing on Letterman, you said you had to be like on your A game or your like B game all the time. How stressful was that? Or did you find that invigorating? You didn't have was that really hard to deal with?
I think for new writers, there can be stressful because everybody seems to know what's going on except you. In my later years, when I was more the elder statesman, I was a little bit more relaxed because I just had the feeling that apparently I can do this and panic is not going to help me. So every day I would get in the subway and just start jotting ideas down. And I'd get to the office and we'd have our meeting and I'd have 2 or 3 ideas that I thought were worth mentioning. And maybe one would get picked, maybe none would get picked that day. But yeah, I was past the point of being stressed.
Anxiety.
Yeah, which is good because you're not going to be as funny when you're anxious, I don't think.
Yeah, because that seems like it would be hard to get the magic if you're freaking out.
Yeah, the kind of ideas that I like to think of are from the sort of more happy place of just seeing surreal things and making weird connections. And if you're paranoid or in a bad mood, that mental muscle isn't going to work quite the same way.
But it's cool to be an artist where like ideas are constantly kind of there. It sounds like you're the type of artist that you're not in the drought. Like it seems like you've got, at least from what you've talked about, that you don't seem to have, not that you don't have those periods, but it seems like you don't fret about it.
Yeah, I'm not going to fret about it, I don't think, at this point. And even if there's no drought, that doesn't mean that the rain that's falling is good quality rain. You have to understand, like with Dylan or Hendrix or whatever, most of the things that come to you and that you try, you're going to end up setting aside or putting in the parts bin for later. So, yeah, even in these years after the Letterman show, you would think that the Letterman show was my creative education, but a lot of it has been in the more recent years of just, well, what do you want to do and try on your own? And how are you going to make things when you're not part of some enormous corporate broadcasting undertaking?
Well, I think it's always really interesting when people are willing to kind of push. I always felt like artists or creative people, that when they're on the bleeding edge or something that's not exactly their wheelhouse, then that's where a lot of magic happens. Like if you put yourself in a place that you're not the most comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
but you're interested in it. That doesn't, so you might not be the best, guitar player, or piano player, or singer, but when you take the material you've written and you're the one playing the guitar, it suits you because you're that, and nobody's like you.
Right. You
So that
find,
becomes like your secret sauce.
yeah, your own voice. Write the song no one else could have written. Sing it the way no one else could have sung it.
Yeah, it's that singer-songwriter thing. In the 70s, everybody kind of, the Joni Mitchells, the James Taylor, like people were just coming out and it's like, wow, these unique voices, and only Joni Mitchell is gonna sing that the way Coyote. He's like she sings that like nobody else can sing that like that song. There's some songs that with certain singer-songwriters you can't really cover them because it doesn't work
Yeah.
with anybody else but that person who wrote it.
Good point. Yeah. Well, that would be a fun thing to aspire to someday. No one else can do this Steve Young song because it's got to be Steve Young. We'll see.
Well, it could be a lot of times your secret sauce is that like the way you did it, the way you sing it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's your piece. So it's not that somebody can't cover it, but like the original is that just a unique piece of work.
That's my hope, is that I have something unique to bring to the table.
Well, I want to thank you for giving your story here today. And we do have your website, steveyoungworld.com. So if people clicked on that, is that how they can get to your new record?
Yeah, and there's also a special site just for the music. It's steveyoungmusic.hearnow.com, and that'll be the launch pad to get you to the Amazon and Spotify and
Everywhere else.
Deezer and Pandora and everything that we got.
All the other
Yes.
platforms.
Yes,
So you're on all the major platforms then.
I think that's the plan. Yeah.
That's awesome. Just another question. Are you thinking about doing this a physical release like vinyl or tape or is it all virtual?
I would love to. I'm leery of it. I think there's, unless again, we'll bring up Taylor Swift. She can sell a mountain of vinyl. I don't know how many people will buy vinyl from me, but I have a fondness for it since I have this bizarre record collection, and I love vinyl. So I won't say no. I'll just say not yet.
Not yet. Yeah, well, there's some micro batch vinyl, but everybody's trying to do it now. So there's some delays in production because everybody's trying to do it. Because there's a group of kids today that are like into vinyl.
Yeah, I
it's
know.
not super big, but you actually don't have to sell a lot to actually do well. You don't have to sell the volume, and so the vinyl is a different animal in our industry right now.
I'm seeing it at merch tables and things like that. I'm happy about that. Yeah.
So thank you again for being on the show. I appreciate it. And everybody should check out your website. That'll be fully clickable in the podcast description. We were just live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. I want to thank you again for being on the show, and have a good week.
Phantom, thank you so much. Enjoyed chatting with you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
All right.